Sweet. Dr. Buzz, welcome to the Fitness and Lifestyle Podcast, mate. It's a pleasure to have you on here, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation today, man.
Yeah, I appreciate you, Dan. You're Dan the man. Everyone in where I'm from, everyone has a nickname or a brand name. So you're
Dan the man. I don't mind it.
Dan the man.
How are you, man? Anyway, so we're briefly just talking about how obviously now that COVID's starting to settle down a little bit, things are ramping back up for most people around the world. What's life looking like for you at the moment?
Yeah, the COVID was weird. It was it taught my team and I a lot of very unique. It created a lot of unique possibilities for us because whereas I was traveling all over the world, trying to get to all of my clients, I work with a lot of high ticket clients, entertainers, athletes, doctors, big time lawyers, CEOs of companies. All of a sudden I had to learn how to use Zoom and it became the greatest tool. Like my team and I are so much more efficient together. We're more organized than we ever have because we're not carrying files and folders everywhere. And, but it is busy because all the entertainers are going back on tour and the athletes are back in action. So it's not overwhelming. It's been tight. But, being structured is the name of the game. Things are tight.
Yeah, structure, systems, they all play such a big role. I mean, for the listener or whoever's watching or listening at the moment, I think going on to maybe one of your social media profiles, having a look at your website and whatnot, and even just kind of hearing in the intro to this episode about some of the work you do, I think there'd be a lot of people interested in what that might look like, working with, say, an individual artist for a period of time or like you said, a big time lawyer, CEO, whatever it may be. On like in its most simple form, like from start to, I guess, finish, or maybe it's ongoing, like what does your work look like with that individual from kind of start to finish from that first kind of consult?
That's a great question. So, I specialize with stress because and it wasn't always that way, but I chose that over the last few years because no body to send people to who are very stress specific and being a clinician. So I'm vetted in neuroscience and brain health and orthomolecular labs and gut health and mental health and all that. And when a client comes to me, the first thing I almost beg some of my clients is I want to get labs on people. I do orthomolecular labs. It's not regular blood work. So there's, if there's any blood, it's blood spotting. It's a little blood spotter on a piece of paper. There's 5 ways we do orthomolecular labs, which I do for almost all my clients: urine, saliva, hair tissue, and mineral analysis, fecal matter, and blood spot. And they all go. I send the kit to them and to their home. They get it done. They send it to the lab, and bam, we get this really cool profile to know why a person is struggling the way that they're struggling. Now, do I have any clients that didn't have to go through that? A few. But it's like 10%. I really try to test because in the world of just mental health, Dan, and you know how this works. It's like if you have a client that comes to you for personal training and you say, hey, so I want to make sure all week long you did all the workout. Yeah, I did it all. And let's say you're not getting the results that you wanted. You're expecting that this person is talking true to you. They're being honest. See, when I get them, they're so stressed out. They're so overwhelmed. And I work with some really fascinating, even the corporate people, billionaire people, multi-gazillionaire people. And it's not that I don't take on the average person. Like I'm the average person. I do. But the reason why I bring them up is because they're the sickest people. The higher the profile, the sicker they are, the longer they go without getting treatment. So the first thing I do is I try to assess, very simple to do. I send the labs at our house. They send them into the laboratory and I get the results in 2 to 3 weeks. In the meantime, my number one intervention, and I say this everywhere, and I was so excited, Dan, because someone just said it to me in a training I was doing, and they said, number one intervention is structure. And I said, oh my God, where did you hear that? Because I always say that. They said, oh, we heard it from you.
Yeah.
So, I structure everybody, get them on a schedule. People need to be in bed by a certain time. Like, you're a big weightlifter exercise guy. Could you imagine your body trying to do what you do regularly and you're not on a structured sleep schedule? Like,
it becomes extremely difficult, doesn't it?
There's no recovery of your brain. Your brain and literally nutritionally restores itself every single night. So what most people don't realize is that your brain also has to get rid of a significant amount of cranial cervical fluid. And if you don't get rid of that, that fluid stays in your brain, and it's called pooling. And that toxicity over years period of time can actually cause dementia. So we see this a lot with pro athletes. But even above and beyond that, restful sleep, getting up in the morning, same time every day. I mean, I got up so early this morning. My whole family's asleep, and 5 is a typical for me. I got up at 3 a.m. this morning, started on my work, knocked it out, went out, did my field work at different corporations and such, but I felt great, and when I'm working with clients, that trajectory that you're asking about is always about how do we structure your life so your body and your brain know exactly what to expect. Mm-hmm. Any unexpected occurrence, activity, insult, perception causes stress to your body. The body is just not okay with that. It becomes reactive to unfamiliar triggers, to familiar triggers that are just overwhelming to the body or the brain. And then lastly, to have them randomly be affecting you is the worst. When you can anticipate, at least you can prepare for to a certain degree. But so for the average person, we're talking about sleep, diet, and appetite. Sleep, diet, and exercise. Just basic stuff.
When you talk about structure, specifically for someone who does have a lot on their plate, let's say it's an entertainer or a professional athlete, I'm assuming there's only so much structure you're able to place in their life. Let's say you've got an entertainer who's doing a world tour or a national tour or whatever it may be. I mean, there's got to be a lot of things that are going to happen from a day to day that are maybe not unexpected, but very miscellaneous, like very different from day to day. Every day is not going to look the same. So I guess what are the key things? Is it the sleep, the nutrition, and the exercise that you structure for someone like them? And then the rest is kind of, you just give them tools to deal with that external stress?
Yeah, I mean, I built one entertainer's schedule out for 5 years ahead of time. So, we knew 3 years and 3 months into the year at 3 o'clock on a certain day, what this person was going to be doing between 2 o'clock and 5 p.m. I mean, crazy. Now, as you go into the week, we can move things a little bit in those brackets, but it was really what I learned. It was really the safest way for this particular person and group for them to be able to thrive. And it's funny because the first bit of feedback I got from the team was, this is going to be so boring. And I said, how could a tour be boring? And they were like, that's a really good point. Yeah, it won't be boring. And I said, your body needs to know when your nutrition's coming, when you're going to be resting. Here's another one, when you're going to be pooping. Bowel movements are hugely important. Yeah. You don't get that toxicity out of your body. I always tell everybody, your body absorbs all the nutrition it needs through its micronutrients, through your small intestine, through your gut and small intestine. Anything that's not nutritional has got to come out, and you got to get it out of you, Mm-hmm. So, but your body needs to know, when is that going to happen? Even drinking water. Most people drink water when they eat. You should be drinking water on a schedule. You should take your supplements on a schedule. So it is, I'm not rigid and regimented. I am structured and predictable. So I like to pivot. And we do this thing, Dan, called flex time, which you'll appreciate, because I do this a lot with personal trainers. So when someone has a really intense schedule, like a lot of my doctors that I treat that are just not well. I mean, I work with a lot of doctors who are just stressed. Stress is a killer. So then what happens is They start eating the wrong things. So pizza's the number one. And if you're going to be a pizza eater, you're going to be a soda drinker. If you're not a soda drinker, you'll be a Dunkin' Donuts, coffee with lots of artificial sweeteners drinker. That's typically how it goes. And the first thing they eliminate from their diet is water. First thing. So then the next thing that happens is they need their frontal lobes, their prefrontal cortex, which gets faded. It's not available to you when you're under stress and you're eating lots of carbs, lots of starches, lots of salt, lots of sugar. So then what happens is, I can tell you, I have a couple doctors I've worked with for years. Adderall became the drug of choice. I take Adderall in the morning, and then it's 5-hour energy, or it's 3 Red Bulls. And you can already hear from this, like, already, if I was listening to this podcast, I'd be saying, where are those doctors? Because I don't want them working on me,
100%. Yeah.
Scary, right?
And it catches up to you, right? Like if you're just continually suppressing the issue by using things like maybe whatever it may be, Adderall, caffeine, whatever, it's going to eventually catch up to you in some way or another. Always.
It's inevitable, right? It's like lifting the wrong way. Eventually this guy's going to get hurt. He's just not doing it right. Your shoulders can't support that kind of weight. Something's going to happen. And that's exactly. And it's not about, I'm not saying this as if this type of community is super irresponsible. It's not about that. It's about what are people willing to do to continue to try to cope.
Yeah.
So think about people in bad marriages. They're in a toxic marriage, but yet they won't go for marriage counseling. I'm pushing people all the time into marriage counseling. And I have people I recommend, and I'm always online looking up LinkedIn. Hey, you're in Australia. You're a marriage counselor. Oh man, do I need you? Because I have people, I don't want to do it. That's not my area of specialty, but that could be very stressful for somebody. And then they don't cope.
From a physio, before we because I want to touch on some ways that tools that people can use to deal with, along with the structure and the nutrition training and sleep and stuff, like some tools people can use to help minimize or at least reduce the stress and cortisol. What physiologically, just so people get an understanding of this, like from a deeper level, I guess, what actually happens to our bodies when they're under deep stress, like when cortisol levels are super high? Like what's the physiological response that which some people probably experience on a daily basis, but just don't actually understand what it is?
It's really the same with everybody. And it's hard for people to wrap their minds around it. But when your body perceives that you're tired, your body perceives that things just aren't right, your body perceives suspicion, your body perceives, I use the word leverage, you're being leveraged. Leverage means if and then. If I'm late for my job, then I might get fired. That's leverage. When your body is taking on an insult meaning like you're sick and you're pushing yourself because you can't take off from work. I'm using that as an example. Your body immediately takes in a signal and sends it to the relay station in your brain called the thalamus. The thalamus within a millisecond has to do something with that information. It'll send information to the thinking part of the brain to try to evaluate what should I do. But if the threat, the leverage, the insult is just too extreme, it'll fire the signal down to your endocrine system and then immediately activates your adrenal glands. Your adrenal glands fire off a stress hormone called cortisol, and cortisol immediately results in pushing a surge of glucose, which is sugar, into your bloodstream. So anybody who gets that strength from glucose, which if you watched a Mike Tyson fight, the more that he would get tired, the stronger he would become. You watch pro athletes even in European soccer, because we have American soccer and then we have American football, but if it's like soccer with a soccer ball, you get guys that are tripping each other and they're pushing each other. That's the cortisol pushing that glucose. And what happens is you get increased blood flow to your limbs, your hands and your feet. So in America, they call it fight or flight. And it makes sense because your flight is blood flow to your feet with a surge of glucose that makes people run. And if it goes to your hands, it makes you grab, tear, punch, something like that.
So the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, right?
So that's the sympathetic, exactly. So in your sympathetic, you notice, here's one, Dan. So for your weightlifting people that I know who you train and appreciate your tools, when someone's laying on the bench and they're going to do their first rep, what do? They lay there and they go, and they take that deep breath. If you notice, they don't do this. You know, they're not breathing through their nose like they're running a long distance race, right?
Yeah.
Because when you breathe through your mouth, you get cold air that comes into your chest, which makes it harder to get it into your lungs, which raises stress hormones. Yeah. So immediately your cortisol goes up. That's why we do this. It's just like what you would do if you were drowning in water.
Yeah.
It's same exact thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we call that labored breathing. And the goal is to become what we call rhythmic breathers, where you breathe in through your nose, out your nose. Because when you're able to breathe in through your nose, out your nose, it reduces the chances of your endocrine system being involved and glucose being pushed through your bloodstream. So the common thread with people who are under a lot of stress is they're pushing so much glucose that now they're putting on weight. Now, I listen to a lot of nutritionists talk about, and even people with COVID and wellness coaches, they all talk about the same thing. Well, when you're sitting around doing nothing, you have a tendency of eating. When I was in COVID, I was sitting around, couldn't go anywhere. I wasn't eating because I knew that food was bad for me. But when I was stressed and you have all the sugar, what does sugar in your bloodstream want? Sugar.
More sugar. Yeah.
That's the bottom line. It is brutally painful when you are stressed and you have high levels of sugar that is looking for what we call fermentation. It wants sugar to work off of sugar. It wants to colonize in your body, and you want to keep your sugar levels up. And unfortunately, the more that you're under stress, here's the killer. When your body gets stressed, your gut cuts off and reduces blood flow and oxygen to your gut. So what happens is your microbiome gets then destroyed because you're not giving it the right amount of oxygen and blood flow. So what ends up happening, Dan, is that people then get, they get stress to the gut. They get gassy, they get burning. Right. And we see this with like people who are like a public speaker. You ever notice they always have a glass of water when they're speaking? Yeah. It's not because they're thirsty, because their mouths get dry. Because when your gut lacks blood flow and oxygen, your hydration leaves your head and your mouth and travels down to your gut to go rescue your gut, which is why people's mouths get dry. That's why we always give public speakers, a bottle of water, not because they're thirsty, because their mouth
is causing the dryness. Yeah.
So the cortisol goes up. It signals the release of sugar. The sugar activates strength through the body. It restricts your breathing, your vascular system, which then makes it harder to do things, but you have strength. And that's why people overreact with stress. They fly off the handle. They're all fired up. And the more that people are that way, the less they're going to sleep, because those sugar levels stay up, your cortisol levels stay up, and you become a non-sleeper. And it's very sad.
Yeah, 100%. So you touched on because I want to go into some of the tools that we can use, like at the current time of stress, of noticing that you're stressed and that things are out of whack. Like you mentioned, the rhythmic breathing, which is a really interesting one. And when you and I spoke about this a couple of months ago, it was something that I started to implement straight away for myself and for my clients as well. I found that super interesting. But outside of the rhythmic breathing, like really focusing on the inhale and, ideally the exhale out of the nose as well. What are some of the tools that you use with yourself or with your clientele in the moment to help reduce stress as quickly as possible or as effectively as possible?
This just happened hours ago. I'm working in a corporate place, rebuilding a company. They always say I'm a corporate wellness coach, But what I end up doing is finding out 99% of the time there's a management issue, there's a leadership issue. So then you have poor communication, and then there's poor direction. And so in this place that I was just in today, everyone's a mess. Everyone's falling apart. Everyone's at each other. And I had a couple mediations bringing people together, and it was amazing because they're saying, God, I really thought you hated me. No, I don't hate you. It's just, I didn't think you were getting enough done. And why didn't you say something? Well, I tried to, but you're like biting my head off, right? So you can see there's all the stress hormone stuff flying through the office. Mm-hmm. So when I was in there, while I'm mediating a bunch of these situations, and this is a new location for me, I realized I had a deadline that was coming up for a meeting that was within a half hour, and I felt my own stress like, oh, man. And I was prepared for it physically, like I had my stuff.
Yeah.
There was just so much emotion all day. I didn't have a moment. And now I knew this meeting was coming, and I have a couple people that were ready to, I know a couple people were ready to kind of come on strong to me and challenge me on some things. So I was getting tired while they were revving up.
Yeah.
So I immediately took a walk a half mile down the road and a half mile back. It took me the full 30 minutes. I came walking in, I'm wearing the same shirt, and I was sweaty. And someone says, where did you go? You were gone for like 30 minutes. I said, I had to go take a walk. And they were like, where did you? I said, I went all the way down to this traffic light. They said, that's like a mile walk. And I said, it was a mile. Why? And I was breathing. So here's the key. When you breathe in through your nose, the air becomes humidified, and it gets into your chest and your lungs easier. Right. And when the air is humidified, your vascular system doesn't become restricted. It stays loose.
Okay.
Restricted is like trying to suck like a baseball through a garden hose. You know what I mean? It's just like not going to happen, right? So we want people to be loose, and that's what I was feeling. I could feel in my chest, and I was trying to breathe, and I felt myself using my mouth. And you know what? I knew these couple people were going to come at me strong. They're not being rude or ignorant. They just have gripes about the company. Everyone is mad, and everyone thinks they have an answer. Mm-hmm. But no one really knows how to manage anything. It's just a management issue. So by walking, I was breathing in 3 seconds in through my nose. But in order to reduce your cortisol levels, so you're not getting surges of glucose, you have to breathe out of your nose twice as long as you were breathing in. That's the $1 million ticket. So when people I just fought. I'm not an MMA guy. I've been in martial arts my entire life, 40 years, and I just was in a full contact competition in Atlantic City, New Jersey, just in January. And before the fight took place, and people from all over the world flew in for this thing, it was huge. I'm in the ring using a technique called havening, where I'm breathing in through my nose for 3 seconds, and then breathing out of my nose for 6 seconds. And when I'm doing this, and my wife got me on video doing it in the ring, while I'm waiting for my opponent to come in, it really looked strange. I watched it myself on the video. I was like saying to myself, I wonder what this guy was thinking about me.
Would have thrown him off for sure.
I know if I was watching somebody do it, I'm like, what the heck?
So
I was so calm, man.
Explain to me the I guess the physiological response or reasoning behind like the havening. So for those that are listening, Buzz is basically doing the inhale and the exhale through the nose, but then at the same time, like I guess like touching your face, like running your hand down your face.
You're using your fingertips and your palms from your hairline to your jawline. So the two doctors who discovered this, Dr. Ronald and Stephen Rudin, two medical doctors, they were doing a lot of brain imaging and brain scans and reading a lot of data with quantitative EEG, and realized that when people had the sense of touch to the head, to the shoulders, to the elbows, or on the hands, that it immediately took high frequency brain waves and leveled them out to make them slow frequency. Right. So instead of being in a gamma frequency, you would go into a delta frequency. So when you really understand sleep cycle, particularly the circadian rhythm, could be a whole nother podcast we can do one day.
Yeah.
You know, we know that you got to go into a delta rhythm in order to get restful sleep. So when you do this, they call it havening. They created this. They noticed when people were wearing the equipment that the brain waves that were here, even in a seizure pattern, the second you would stroke them, would go into a delta pattern.
Level out. Interesting.
So we then started studying massage, like people who are getting giving massages. We noticed that it wasn't the deep tissue push or manipulation. It was the stroking. It was the sensory sensation of these neurons. So what happens is it raises serotonin, it raises dopamine, it raises GABA. So you're talking about your reward system, your feel-good system, and your what we call anxiety prevention system, what your resilience to worry. And then when those three chemicals rise, you get a push of oxytocin, which is another hormone that makes people want to hug. We call it the huggable hormone. It's amazing. So you'll notice if you do it with a dog, when you pet a dog, a lot of times they'll want to lick you. It's a huggable hormone. They have an oxytocin moment.
Try it out on the big fella in a second.
For sure. For sure.
I remember seeing this, maybe it was on a video a while back with Bieber or something like that. He was must have obviously been in quite a stressed state, and I remember seeing some footage of you and him.
I trained Justin on this. No one even heard of this technique yet, and I said to Justin, "Listen, I'm not going. You know, we're so close. Like, man, he's just such a good guy. He's amazing, and he's all about wellness. He's a huge Christian." And I was afraid that if he didn't have a tool that he could use for himself, like what happens if I'm not around? And I just couldn't. I have 5 kids. I can't have that kind of responsibility on me. And I want him to be independent. And he was like, just give me the tools. So we used that as our primary tool with him calming in his breathing and grounding himself. Where am I? What do I smell? A lot of times we break up. I do this for athletes the most. We break, you'll love this. We spray something that people can smell when they're having what's called a stress reaction. So imagine you're in a delta function, which is very calm. You're ready to go to sleep, and the smoke alarm goes off in your house, and you smell smoke. You then go into this gamma, right? Which is like bipolar, like almost like bipolar. So bipolar disorder is a dysrhythmia of your thalamus. So are seizures. That's what people go into when they're stressed. It's the same cycle. Well, we noticed that if you can immediately catch yourself and just use a stroking on your body, you can bring it down to a delta so people can focus and then they can plan. So, you know, people like Justin, they need tools. They're on the road. You know, people, listen, you know, I have a couple big entertainers out in Australia as well. People are all over these entertainers. They don't get a break. They're in their business. You know, someone's tired. They want to just go in their house and go to sleep. And you got 50 people outside your gate trying to take pictures, or they're saying not nice things, or you lay down on your couch to go get a nap, and then you see something posted about you terrible on Instagram or whatever. So those tools, like Justin's the man. Justin like nailed it, and he's just such a he's the ambassador, man, of being a responsible wellness advocate. He's just a fascinating guy who's just super, super responsible. At the same time, when I'm working with like pro athletes, let's say pro basketball, the guys at the foul line. So you'll love this, Dan. This is so good for you. Guys at the foul line, he goes to take a foul shot, but what happens when there's only 3 seconds on the clock, and if you miss the shot, you lose the game? Well, your stress hormones go up. The problem is when your cortisol levels go up, your prefrontal cortex is less available to you. In order to get your prefrontal cortex back, you got to reduce your cortisol levels. So what does every basketball player do before they shoot a foul shot? Watch. take a deep breath.
Yeah. Yep.
Because it brings their cortisol down and they can think clearer, and your prefrontal cortex controls your motor coordination.
Right.
So this is what they do. They go, when I'm training these guys, I tell them, breathe in for 3, breathe out for 6. 99% of the time, they only want to breathe out their mouth. They would do better by breathing out their nose.
So inhale and exhale through the nose?
No one wants to breathe through their nose. You got to breathe through your nose. Listen, can it still work breathing through out your mouth? The answer is yes. Yeah. It works better with, and then through your nose. It's the when you humidify the air, that humidified air, the temperature allows things to flow easier. So your vascular system and your vitals stay calm. But the key here is, even then, I'll have guys, they'll take a deep breath. They'll say to themselves, I'm still not right. They'll bounce the ball again and try it again. What I tell them second time, get the ball up to your nose and smell the leather of the ball. The human brain and your endocrine system can't have a stress reaction and access the sense of smell simultaneously.
At the same time. Mm.
It immediately drops it. You got a window of like a second. Yeah. So they'll go and then take the shot.
And then shoot, yeah. What's the similarities between, or I guess the difference between, say, the havening technique and something like what's another example? Say, for example, like the Wim Hof breathing method, where you're doing almost the opposite, where you're doing like the long inhale and the short exhale and almost hyperventilating, and then the process of holding the breath and whatnot. Like, what's the difference between the two? And is that type of breathing technique something that you, I guess, believe in or think works?
Love that. So the Wim Hof, the problem is when people are feeling desperate, it means their stress is already up. So when someone says stress, I tell the world, you have to equate stress and hormones as being synonymous. Mm-hmm. Because when your body takes on a perception of something, it's not stressful until your hormones activate. Then you feel it, right? Because your body is getting prepared for battle. It's getting prepared for rejection. It's getting prepared for defense of something. So when you suspend your breathing, people hold their breath. There's one that it was used in schools in New Jersey in the United States. It's called 4-7-8 breathing. Breathe in for 4 seconds, hold for, breathe out for 8. The problem is when people are in duress, the stress is really high, and between being stressed, they're starting to fall into distress. The difference is stress, your brain can perceive there's a way out. Distress, there's no way out. Okay. So what happens is if you're going into distress and you suspend your breathing, people will hyperventilate, they'll freak out, you'll get too much sugar in there and people will overreact. Mm-hmm. Or if it was a police officer holding a guy, maybe he's got him in a choke, he'll squeeze, he could accidentally kill somebody, the gun gets pulled by accident. So when you suspend, the brain gets more desperate. Right. Most times, unless you're really, 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 really trained, like the movie American Sniper. You spent a half hour in that movie slowing down his breathing to make one shot that has never been done in the United States of America military's history. So, and it was all based on breathing. He slowed his breathing down to slow his heart rate down, to slow his pulse rate down in order to have control of his index finger. Isn't that amazing? The other side of that is when you do havening, what havening does, this is another podcast, what havening does is when people have trauma, they develop inside the center of their brain. The center of your brain is called your subcortical region of your brain. In that area, you have what is called your amygdala. It's the memory center that stores not only your memory of the details and events that cause a psychological emotional trauma, but it also stores the emotion that goes with it.
Okay.
The emotion is actually stored in a little tiny receptor called the AMPA, AMPA, AMPA receptor. And that receptor is in the amygdala. When the brain takes in a signal that reminds the AMPA, reminds the amygdala of something that was connected or reminds you of the original insult that caused the trauma, the AMPA receptor moves itself to the outside of the amygdala and starts scanning territory, looking for more signals to see if you're at risk. When you do the havening, it actually resolves the activation of the AMPA receptor.
Okay.
Whereas slow breathing has nothing, won't do that. Okay. Slow breathing will bring your stress hormones down, but when the AMPA is out and it's that's what hypervigilance is. And this thing's looking, you're stuck with it unless you come up with a technique. And that's what havening, if done right, with the right process, with the right triggers in the right sequence, can actually eliminate that receptor and disintegrate it and remove it forever.
Forever, right? Because I feel as though that process of those receptors firing and wiring is stuff that someone like a Joe Dispenza talks about a lot, and the familiar response to a stimulus that's happened in the past. So we, without even thinking about it, we spend every single day behaving in a way that is just because of our familiar past, which
85% of your behaviors are from your responding to your past.
Yeah, super interesting. I mean, Matt, we could sit here and talk all day. I could definitely sit here and talk with you all day.
I know, man. You're great. I appreciate you.
Before we wrap up, I'd love to hear maybe like a firsthand answer around, like, you don't have to give a name, obviously, because I'm sure privacy is a big thing in the industry that you work in. But maybe like an example of someone's state that they were in when you started first working with them, and then the current state they're in now. So like probably one of the better examples that you've seen with working with.
Yeah, I'll give you a great one. I have a young lady in her 30s who was not able to be admitted into one hospital, medical nor psychiatric hospital in the entire state of New York. No one would take her.
For what reason?
She had been so assaultive and so erratic and so aggressive that we were trying to find a place for her out of state. When I got her as a client patient,
was that something from? Sorry to interrupt. Was that a result of like drug use or just a psychological problem, or what?
That's a great one. So trauma was number one, psychological trauma. But guess where the trauma came from? From the first time this person went to a psychiatric hospital, the person was so mistreated and then was ganged up on by other more aggressive client patients that her first time in a hospital caused her trauma. So every repeated, as you were saying, the memory of the insult, every time that she would get readmitted into a hospital, she would live the experience of the first hospital and then think, and her body's reaction with glucose, I'm going to get to them before they get to me.
Right.
To the point where when I got her, she was on 9 psychiatric medications with nothing working. And I said to the person who referred her to me, a donor paid for all of her services. She didn't have any money. Wow. And he said, would you make this a charitable case and I'll pay, but could you help us out? And I did. And we did it. I said, I'll give you 1 year. And in 1 year's time, so I imaged her brain with a SPECT image and found her left temporal lobe had a lack of blood flow, which causes very irregular mood type disorders.
Okay.
So you may say, well, why did that happen? Well, that happened because I found that she had a really leaky gut. She was not gluten-free. She was eating anything she could get her hands on. She was full of mold. She had tons of mold in her. I ran mycotoxin tests, found tons of mold that comes from wet buildings. And that mold was in her brain and it was in her gut. So I cleaned out all of her mold. I detoxed her gut from really bad bacteria that was ultimately potentially carcinogenic if she lived with that in her colon for maybe 15 or 20 years. I cleaned that out. I restored her gut, rebuilt her microbiome, rebuilt the digestive process with really good enzymes and what's called chelation. So that whole process there took 6 months. Then I cleaned her out for all metals. I found metals in her because she's in the city.
Wow.
So in the city, when you're breathing pollution, all has an effect on your body. I went and took her, did a quantitative EEG, and I found in the beginning, as I was doing all these labs, that she had the same pattern of brain frequency as a person who was having a seizure. So now the question becomes, so what do you do about it? So the doctor who I worked very closely with gave her anti-seizure medicine called Lamictal. And we use a science where we built an algorithm with genetic testing, and we could tell not only what medicine she needs, how many milligrams, and how long it's going to take us to get there. She's only on one medication because this seizure activity is a biological weakness that she has, and it's coming from the left temporal lobe.
Right.
And we can't restore it. But that medicine, the Lamictal, goes in and restores and balances that. She's completely cleaned out. She works full time. She lost 75 pounds in 8 months.
Wow.
Absolutely amazing. And right now she is training to be in a fitness show.
Oh, sweet. Awesome.
She looks amazing. She looks amazing. And she's doing really, really well. And she no longer needs to be in a hospital, which is even the better part.
Yeah.
And
fantastic.
the coolest thing about it, Dan, is we post-tested her. We ran her through all the same tests we did in the beginning to see that everything's been resolved, except for the left temporal lobe is permanence. We can't, we just couldn't fix it. So
the
she takes the medicine.
low blood and oxygen supply to that.
Yeah, she doesn't get enough blood flow to her left temporal lobe. And as a result of that, and that's very common with people who have seizure disorder.
Okay.
So I thought we might be able to reverse that by getting all the metals out of her and all the mold, and we just couldn't. So if she goes off the medicine, she will have seizure-like activity, but not mental health type symptoms.
Right.
Which is
Very
great.
interesting, man. It's crazy. It's extremely powerful stuff. And man, Dr. Buzz, I appreciate your time, man. I really do. Always
Thank you, man.
When we
Likewise.
get to have a chat. And for those that are listening or watching at the moment, we hope you have enjoyed this episode. If you have, we'd love for you to take a screenshot of this one, post up on your Instagram story, tag myself, tag Buzz. I'll have the links to his socials and the website and whatnot in the show notes today. But I appreciate your time, man.
Hey, Dan, can I say one thing? So I have a free stress workshop on April 4th. And you guys can look for the links, and you can sign up even. It's free. I have Facebook and Instagram, but everything's at Dr. Buzz, B-U-Z-Z, Mingin, M-I-N-G-I-N. And you can even message me on, Instagram, but it's free. And, I just want people to learn the tools. I want people to get better. And, I have a number of clients out in Australia, so I'm going to be out there sooner than later. But I appreciate you taking the time and letting me on, because the goal is to educate people so we can get them well, man. That's always the goal.
Lovely. Thank you. Thanks so much, mate. I appreciate your time. And I think everyone would have taken a lot of value away from this episode. So I appreciate it. And I look forward to catching you hopefully soon, sometime in
Yes,
Australia.
sir.
Looking forward to it, man. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, sir. Have a great one.